121. On the brink of losing control, the unexpected protection of Soul Puppet Zero. A crack, sharp and precise, not from outside, but exploding inside Jason's mind. At the center of the magic array, Node 7, one of the three cornerstones of the triangular resonance and the rune pedestal holding the dragon blood crystal's volatile energy, sprouted a second and then a third web of fine fissures across its surface. Each fracture rang in his nerves like a heavy hammer blow. Warning: Node 7 structural integrity below 30%. Energy containment failure. Reality deconstruction procedure irreversibly initiated from this point. Soul Puppet Zero's voice echoed in his head, every bite like an epitaph. Estimated 25 seconds until chain detonation. The balance of the array was collapsing with avalanche speed. Liquefied elemental energy escaped like a furious acid, gouging deep, smoking pits into the base's rock walls. The rock layers groaned under unbearable strain. Dust and small stones cascaded down. The entire underground chamber trembled as if it would collapse and bury him alive in the tomb he had built. The grand blueprint for the floating city, the endless entries in the Arcane Codex, his ambitions to explore the multiverse, everything threatened to be erased by this elemental roar. No. In the core of Jason's spirit, the illusory golden sun flared one last time, pushing out a fight to suppress the collapsing tide. Against a force that felt like a cosmic catastrophe, his resistance was fragile. His magic circuits were shredded, the arcane heart's nascent form pulsed with agonizing difficulty, on the verge of snuffing out. Then Soul Puppet Zero's countdown began to stutter, like a record skipping. Chain ditzz, O Nation. A soul fluctuation burst through Jason's consciousness. Not arcane energy, but something cold, malicious, full of fear and loathing. It carried a decay stench and the prickling chill of corruption. Lord Voldemort's remnant soul. No, a primal silent roar at the soul level, pure instinctive terror before the elemental force of annihilation. The dark arts were cunning and parasitic, but the elemental tide was the world's bedrock, the universe's breath, embodying both the most fundamental creation and the most absolute destruction. It could erase a soul without trace. For Voldemort, whose spirit had been splintered and clung to each fragment as a tether to immortality, this pure annihilation was the deepest fear. Deep inside Soul Puppet Zero's core, the shard of Voldemort's remnant that Jason had used as an auxiliary for the puppet's intelligence flared with survival panic. It didn't want to help Jason. It simply did not want to be ground into nothing alongside him. That compressed, desperate soul power surged like a drowning man grabbing for a reed. It could not directly push back the elemental tide, but it sensed the complex emergency routines Jason had embedded in Soul Puppet Zero. Precise, intricate auxiliary programs designed to stabilize the magic array. Under the remnant's irrational, fear-driven input, those programs activated in a warped but effective way. Several rune nodes on the brink of failure, including the already cracked Node 7, were suddenly bathed in a dim, ghostly green light, a flicker like a candle fighting the wind. The color clashed with the array's arcane blue, but the light strangely held the failing runes together, as if an invisible hand had stitched the crumbling dam with rotten but tenacious threads. Warning: unknown soul interference. Auxiliary program, abnormal activation, node stability, temporarily increased by 3%. Soul Puppet Zero's voice trembled with interference, but its data cleared Jason's fogged mind. Stabilized? Only briefly, and in a most unsettling way. The green glow felt malevolent, but the collapse had been arrested. Those extra seconds were precious. Jason had no time to analyze motive or malice. He gambled. All his mental power and will flowed into the mental core. The golden sun shattered into pure mental fuel and surged toward the arcane heart's struggling embryonic form. Click, like a first heartbeat at the birth of a universe, or the crisp crack of a seed breaking soil, the barrier broke. Boom. A new power erupted, denser, more condensed, radiating a majesty that seemed to look down on all things. Silver blue light flooded Jason's body. The shattered magic circuits were drawn, reshaped, and purified by it as if countless streams were rushing back to the ocean. If his previous magic had been a trickle, now it became roaring liquid mercury, heavy, compact, explosively potent. The array still shuddered, but the leakage diminished. Jason felt command returning over the elemental tide. He began to guide and regulate it. He opened his eyes. The ghostly blue arcane light in his pupils had nearly solidified, carrying a faint, oppressive aura, that of a second-order arcanist. He had done it, against the brink of annihilation, and with that strange intervention, he had stepped into the second order in this low-level world. Joy was instant and sharp, then cut by suspicion. The remnant soul's aura inside Soul Puppet Zero had weakened after its outburst, yes, but it also showed a new vitality, something indeterminate and unsettling. Had it merely acted on survival instinct? Was this unexpected aid a poisoned chalice, a seed of future danger? The elemental tide was not fully spent. The advancement crisis was not wholly resolved. He had to stabilize his domain and repair the runaway array. A new storm was only beginning. Jason's consciousness plunged into Soul Puppet Zero's core. Voldemort's remnant was weaker, but alive, animated by sheer self-preservation. It had saved itself, and in doing so, had saved him. Chapter 122, A Feast of Knowledge, Plane Theory and Elemental Energy Tower Blueprints. Jason's voice, cold and precise, cut through his consciousness like a scalpel. Data flow corrupted, initiating self-correction. Soul Puppet Zero replied, its voice crackling with static. Report, core detected unauthorized soul power surge. Source, remnant soul of Lord Voldemort. Behavioral pattern, triggered unconscious self-preservation due to extreme fear of pure elemental annihilation. Result, temporary activation of 3 emergency stabilization protocols. Key nodes reinforced briefly. It saved you, and it saved me, Jason murmured. He sank his awareness into Zero's core. In that ocean of runes and data, a decaying wisp of consciousness trembled, far weaker than before, but still cunning. Tom Riddle's malice, like a virus, had sparked a faint instinct to survive, an out-of-control variable. Jason would not let his core assistant be parasitized by another will. Now that he had advanced to the second order, the first thing he would do was a complete surgical purge. Zero, open the lowest level of core authority. Construct an internal rune matrix. Authority confirmed. Arcane light flared in Jason's eyes. He raised a finger and traced runes in the void, each one acting directly on the conceptual core. His newly born second-order magic flowed from his fingertips, heavy and metallic like mercury. The first rune formed. Shackle. The silver-blue sigil instantly branded the remnant soul. It emitted a silent shriek as its nascent vitality was locked down. The second rune followed. Strip. Like precise tweezers, it reached into the remnant and separated memory, emotion, and knowledge from the pure soul essence. Then Jason activated the Grand Sun Codex. A miniature golden flame ignited at his fingertip, as if drawn from some tiny sun, an embodiment of second-order sun true fire, a natural bane to spirits and dark minds. Within that flame, he forged the third, most critical rune, Purify. The rune became a blinding light and washed over the stripped will of Lord Voldemort. There was no dramatic scream. Before the sun true fire, the dark consciousness was like snow under a scorching sun, silently evaporated, decomposed into primitive, harmless mental energy, and dissipated into nothingness. Purification procedure complete. Lord Voldemort's intelligent features removed. Core stability increased to 99.9%. Zero's voice returned to its absolute cold normal. The crisis was over. The advancement and the operation had almost drained him. Exhaustion crashed over Jason like a tide. At the same moment, an ecstatic surge of knowledge poured from the Arcane Codex, flooding his senses. Advancement successful. Second-order Arcanist. Mental power limit opened. Magic circuit reconstruction complete. Magic quality improved. Second-order knowledge base unlocked. Boom. Knowledge, like a torrent of runes, etched itself into his soul. Countless deeper, more complex runes, formations, and spell paradigms surged in. With a flick of his fingers, the air in front of him twisted into an invisible, repulsive field. His mental power fanned out like tentacles and brushed reality itself. Jason's consciousness drifted through innumerable nascent temples of knowledge, finally pausing before 2 immense structures. The plaque on one read in ancient arcane script, preliminary explanation of spatial beacons and planar travel theory. He pushed the doors open. Inside was no bookshelf, but a miniature, boundless dark universe. Countless bubbles of light floated within, some as vast as stars, some as tiny as dust motes. Each bubble a plane. For a long beat, Jason felt small and unreal in the face of this grandeur. So the world I live in is only one grain in an endless sea of sand. Runes and glyphs cascaded across his mind. Plane, the basic unit of the multiverse. World barrier, the manifestation of planar rules, separating inside from outside. Spatial beacon, a lighthouse anchored to planar coordinates, the foundation for travel. Travel, essentially a high-risk, rule-breaking form of smuggling. These precise, subversive theories made the magical world's tall tales about other dimensions seem crude. Zero, digitize this theory, establish a preliminary planar model, and deduce the minimum energy threshold and risk probability for safe travel. Command received, modeling initiated. Zero's processing tore the theory apart and rebuilt it into a dynamic, interactive multiverse sandbox inside Jason's mind. He suppressed the urge to plunge deeper and turned to the second temple. Its facade was plain yet full of purpose. The plaque read, "Comprehensive Blueprint for Small Elemental Energy Gathering Pools." This was what he needed. He pushed the door, and a vast, precise, three-dimensional blueprint unfolded. Energy lines crisscrossed it. The structure, materials, and functions of every component were labeled. It was an energy factory in miniature, an elemental conversion matrix at the bottom, an energy storage core in the middle, and a standardized output module on top. With this, the floating city could become an unyielding fortress. Its stealth array could run at full power, and its defensive shield withstand legendary-level strikes. The path forward became suddenly, painfully clear. Zero. Analyze the blueprint. List all required materials and compare them with inventory and known magical world resources. Analyzing. Comparison complete. Material list generated. 172 types of magical materials required. 114 rare grade, 27 epic grade. Inventory comparison. Existing materials satisfy 83%. Missing materials: void vine sap, deep sea naga tears, astral dust, and designated as the only acceptable material for the energy storage core, geothermal crystal core. Jason's brow tightened. Geothermal crystal core. Search local world databases. Retrieval complete. In all known data for the local world, HP plane, there is no record of a geothermal crystal core. Attribute analysis indicates this material forms deep within the geothermal veins of high magic planes, condensed under great pressure over tens of thousands of years. He had the blueprint and the theory. He had almost everything. But the most critical battery didn't exist in this world. His gaze returned to the planar theory temple. A bold, half-dangerous idea sparked in him, thick with both risk and opportunity. He looked again at the missing material list and issued a new command into his own mind. Zero, based on existing materials, begin deducing and constructing a minimized model for a one-time planar beacon. The underground base was charred black, the air thick with the sharp tang of ozone and powdered rock. Jason sat cross-legged in the center of the cracked magic circle, a statue that had survived a catastrophe. The elemental tide's aftershocks had faded, but inside him a far fiercer storm was just beginning. Newly born second-tier mana surged through him. It flowed like liquid metal, heavy as mercury. Each cycle felt like molten iron scouring his limbs and bones, an agonizing tearing that came with a strange pleasure, as if bone and marrow were being reshaped. In his weakened, nearly shattered body, he had to tame it. His consciousness sank into his spiritual core, and the Grand Sun Codex's second-tier method began to run automatically. The newly formed arcane heart pulsed violently. Above it, an imposing, majestic phantom of golden sun true fire rose, radiating blinding light. The silver-blue mana in his body, under that golden illumination, began a painful forging. Invisible golden threads emanated from its depths like scorching chains, snaking through the liquid mana, intertwining and fusing until each drop was branded with a glorious gilded seal. A domineering, scorching aura poured out from him, repelling darkness and corruption. The negative energy that had fled into the corners of the base when the circle collapsed hissed and dissolved under that radiance, like worms exposed to a merciless sun. In the depths of Jason's pupils, two miniature suns seemed to burn. He stood, swaying as his form adjusted to the intense restructuring. He raised a hand. A wisp of mana wrapped in flowing golden flames gathered at his fingertips. Sun true fire. A thought crossed his mind. Time to test control. He aimed at a feather on the ground, a leftover from an earlier experiment, and tried to form the simplest, most familiar levitation charm. The moment the mana reached out, disaster struck. The Sun True Fire's overwhelming nature contaminated the entire spell structure. Gentle mana turned violent. The delicate rune lattice was incinerated in an instant. The spell spun out of control. The feather vanished the instant it touched the unleashed power. No ash, no trace. Atomized, erased from the physical plane. Jason's fingertips even felt a faint spatial tremor in the air. Warning. Spell model collapsed. Energy overload 1200%. Target object has been vaporized at the rule level. Soul Puppet Zero's voice was flat as ice, and it hit Jason like a bucket of cold water. He stared at his empty fingers and fell silent. His power had indeed skyrocketed, absurdly so, but the cost was almost complete loss of fine control over low-level spells. Until he learned to handle it, he was a child holding a nuclear bomb without the tools to dismantle it. Any skillful spell could become catastrophic. Zero, reevaluate the base's safety level, he said, forcing down his thoughts. There were more urgent problems. Evaluating. Combining the intensity of energy dispersion from this advancement, the Ministry of Magic's potential tracking spells, and current physical concealment measures, the overall safety level is dangerous. There is a 47% chance of being locked onto by the Ministry of Magic's tracking spells within the general area in the next 15 days. The result did not surprise him. The floating city foundation, 500 meters square, was like an elephant in a forest. No matter how many bushes were piled on it, its sheer bulk betrayed it. Fudge's flushed face and the magnesium lights flashing on the judgment seat came back to him with annoying clarity. He walked to the center of the base and traced luminous paths in the air with his mana. Conventional concealment arrays, stacked to their limit. Command confirmed. Starting theoretical model construction. Countless runes wove through the air, forming a layered phantom of a magic circle that enveloped the base's model. Model established. Energy mimicry, optical camouflage, sensory shielding, all known concealment methods integrated. Zero's calculations were lightning fast. Starting simulation. The phantom shone brilliantly, cloaking the internal model. Then, without warning, a red line appeared, a tracking spell. It ignored the disguises and pierced the core of the circle. Simulation result, failed. Against the Ministry of Magic's highest-level Heaven's Eye charm, the current solution will be cracked within 3 hours. Jason frowned. Increase energy output. Forcible interference. Energy output increased to 300%. The phantom grew dazzlingly bright, trying to push back the red line. Warning, energy reserves will be depleted within 4 days. This solution is unsustainable. Useless. Jason waved the phantom away. Conventional methods wouldn't work. Hiding only delays discovery. As long as the thing remained, it could be found. Unless it wasn't there at all. His consciousness slipped into the Arcane Codex again, pausing before the grand chapter titled Preliminary Explanation of Spatial Beacons and Planar Travel Theory. A mad, audacious idea took shape, one that would overturn common assumptions of the world. He drew another line in the air, but this time he didn't build any known magic circle. The surrounding air twisted subtly under his fingertip, as if an invisible hand pinched a flat canvas. Zero, abandon all concealment, disguise, and interference schemes, he said, excitement threading his voice. We're not moving the base, we're moving space itself. Unable to understand command, please redefine moving space. For the first time, Soul Puppet Zero's logical core stalled. Jason finished his final stroke. A complex, self-consistent runic formation stabilized in the air. It didn't glow or radiate fluctuations, but it warped the surrounding space into a visible, inward-folding illusion. On the periphery of the base, create a localized spatial curvature discontinuity, he ordered, pointing. Think of it like pinching a fold in a sheet of paper. Any physical passage or spatial detection will be guided along that fold, sliding from one end to the other, and forever unable to reach the interior hidden within the fold. Zero was silent for 3 full seconds. Analyzing spatial fold theory, analogous to high-dimensional application of the undetectable extension charm. Warning, theoretical model exceeds safety threshold. Computation resource utilization 98%, urgently allocating backup cores. Alarms blared in Jason's mind. This was unprecedented, to turn a macroscopic region into an independent spatial island, inaccessible from the outside. Exactly. He looked at the rune model, the promise of absolute safety. Zero, name this plan divine concealment. Immediately begin deductions, list all necessary materials, and calculate the success rate. 124. a 500-meter-long invisibility cloak. Soul Puppet Zero's cold voice echoed in Jason's mind. Divine concealment plan, preliminary feasibility analysis complete. The theory is free of paradoxes, and the logic is self-consistent. Based on existing resources and a single-person construction capability of a second-order Arcanist, the success rate is 0.03%. In the underground base, Jason ignored the ridiculously low probability. In an Arcanist's lexicon, probability only marked insufficient variables. He rose, his second-order sight picking out the residual spatial ripples in the air, like the faint warmth that lingers after boiling water. It was time to see his true masterpiece. Silver-blue arcane light traced a small teleportation rune beneath his feet. With a flash, he vanished from the charred underground chamber and reappeared in a clearing. Underfoot lay a colossal foundation he had assembled from giant stones, 500 meters on each side, a slab that looked like an ancient beast sprawled on the earth, silently proclaiming the builder's ambition. Nearby mountains had been hollowed out, topsoil scraped away. The effect was crude and brutal, an aesthetic of raw power. He had originally shrouded this area with illusions and layers of mist formations, enough to confuse any muggle who might wander by and to fool most wizards. Jason examined the still operating formations and shook his head. Child's play. He flicked his arm. An invisible ripple ran outward, and the misty illusions dissolved like morning fog under sun, revealing the foundation's raw form. He would give this giant creature a real invisibility cloak. Jason walked to the center of the foundation and closed his eyes. His mental power surged like a tide, probing and perceiving the space in the unique way of a second-order Arcanist. 0. Establish a four-dimensional real-time model centered on me. Coordinate axes, X, Y, Z, and the fourth axis, curvature. Command confirmed. Four-dimensional spatial model under construction. In his mind, a massive three-dimensional model snapped into place. The foundation, the forest, the mountains, all became pure points of data. We're not hiding things, Jason said aloud in the empty air. We're hiding space. He drew a finger through the model, marking 17 red nodes around the outer boundary of the foundation. First layer, the main structure, spatial folding. At these 17 nodes, construct microsingularities. Use them as pillars to pinch and fold the entire 500-meter by 500-meter volume out of the plane of this world, creating an independent, closed curvature field. Calculating. Singularity stability requires moonstone powder mixed with starlight silver as an energy medium. Estimated total consumption, 34 kilograms. Construction difficulty, extremely high. Inventory is sufficient. Jason's tone didn't change. Second layer is an optical distortion field. As a backup, it must activate if the main structure has energy fluctuations. It will simulate the external 300-meter environment and deflect all light, sound, and physical detection paths entering the area by 37.5 degrees, forcing them to bypass us. Optical camouflage model established. Requires constant energy output, provisioned by 3% of the future elemental energy pool's backup interface. The third layer is energy isolation. I don't want Dumbledore sensing a perpetually running magic engine when he goes for a walk. Coat the inner surfaces with the mucus of a void jellyfish and engrave 108 energy-absorbing runes to absorb and neutralize scattered energy fluctuations, converting them into harmless heat. Plan feasible. Inventory meets 90%. Remaining material can be substituted with acromantula silk glands at a 7% reduction in effect. Acceptable. Jason's thoughts accelerated. The light trails his fingertips traced became ever more intricate. The final layer, and the crucial one, is anti-prophecy detection. He hesitated. This was where his Arcanist system truly outstripped the local magic. I want an information black hole. Use dragon blood crystal powder mixed with thestral brain nerve extract to build a causal disruption matrix on the inner wall of the spatial fold. Any prophecy, divination, or scrying spell aimed at this area will be swallowed and scrambled by the matrix, feeding the caster back nothing but pure, meaningless chaos. Soul Puppet Zero fell silent for 5 full seconds, as if even its processors felt the pressure of such an idea. Warning: interference at the causal level will generate unpredictable chain reactions. This plan exceeds safe parameters. I want to exceed the safe parameters. I want Fudge and his aurors, hell, let the Daily Prophet tear itself to pieces, and still not find a single word about this place. I want Dumbledore to scry 10,000 times and see only mist. That was the Arcanist's dominance, not just to be undiscoverable, but to erase the very notion of searching. Reevaluating. The 4-layer composite concealment array plan is confirmed. Final optimization in progress, performing engineering calculations. Jason lowered his hand and stood quietly in the Foundation's center. Mountain air brushed his clothes. He knew this would upend the magical world's understanding of secrecy. After a long pause, Soul Puppet Zero spoke again. Plan optimization complete. Designation, Divine Concealment. Engineering build generated. Total runes required, 87,421, including 3,600 core runes. Total length of energy circuits required, 13,520 meters. Construction process, 1,254 steps. Warning, based on the optimal model for single-person construction, estimated completion time is 7 years, 4 months, and 3 days. 7 years. The smile drained from Jason's face. 7 years, he might be long gone by then. Lord Voldemort might have risen and fallen twice. He scooped up a fistful of gravel and hurled it at the distant mountain wall. The stone whistled, slammed into rock, and burst into dust. The echo rattled the valley like his own frustration. He was not a god, just a transmigrator with a bit more knowledge than the locals. Time was his scarcest resource. He paced the Foundation's edge, grinding the grit underfoot. He could not do this alone. Absolutely not. The project was enormous. Carving the basic runes would be tedious and mentally draining. Higher-level runes required sustained mental power and couldn't be delegated to ordinary magic puppets. This realization wasn't inspiration. It was a conclusion forced by reality. Jason stopped and returned to the Foundation's center. From his storage, he produced a fresh roll of parchment, a quill, and a bottle of ink. He needed clever, capable, and utterly reliable helpers. Faces flickered through his mind, people who had been training for some time and should be useful now. 125, Arcane Golem Army, Hermione Granger, a supercomputer of a mind, bred for learning and driven by a near-religious devotion to magic theory. Give her a problem that mattered, and she would become the most capable researcher in the world. Fred and George Weasley, rule-shattering, delightfully destructive, perfect for Plan B. When a project hit a bottleneck, they always produced unexpected, unconventional solutions. And Severus Snape, investor, true potion master, a depth of alchemical skill Jason couldn't imagine anyone else having. For the stranger items on the procurement list, Thestral neural extract among them, Jason couldn't think of anyone more reliable. More important, Snape was already on his pirate ship. As an early investor in the floating city, he had motive and obligation to protect his investment. Jason unscrewed an ink bottle, dipped the nib deep, and wrote a single name at the top of the first parchment. Professor Severus Snape. The name on the page looked wrong somehow, harsh against the brown fiber. Jason stared at it as if he could see the man himself frowning back through the paper. No, training all these people would take time. Snape hadn't signed anything, and aligning people's wills was the most complex project under the heavens. Warning, a high-intensity long-range magic scan detected. Preliminary assessment indicates a Ministry of Magic all-seeing eye wide-area search is being prepared. Soul Puppet Zero's mechanical voice echoed in his mind. Based on scan intensity and frequency, this area can be precisely located in approximately 72 hours. He clenched his fist. The parchment with Snape's name crumbled to dust in his palm. Putting his hopes on others was never his style. His gaze swept the base and fell on the Noma, the rock golem standing quietly in the corner. Loyal, stupid things, only capable of the simplest digging and hauling commands. Faced with the more than 80,000 intricate runes that made up the Divine Concealment Array, they were no better than piles of discarded rock. Something unnamed flared in Jason's chest. He needed an army, absolutely obedient, tireless, and literate in arcane script. He would forge them himself. He strode to the nearest Noma and impatiently pushed it aside. The instant his fingertip touched the coarse rock, an uncontrolled wisp of second-tier magic, its edges licking with arrogant golden flame, snapped free from his agitation. Sizzle! The wisp of sun-true fire branded the Noma's chest like a red-hot iron. searing a tiny, perfectly structured rune into the stone that glowed faintly gold. Jason froze, staring at the accidental mark. His breath quickened. A wild idea struck like lightning. There weren't enough qualified soldiers, so he, the sole general, would make them himself. "Zero," he ordered. "Use the core of a second-tier arcane puppet war guardian as a blueprint. Strip all offensive modules. Keep the logical computation and fine manipulation systems. Combine that with auxiliary rune engraving functions and design a completely new upgrade plan for the Noma." Plan simulation in progress. Upgrade plan generated. Warning: complexity of the new core structure is 700 times that of the original. In the host's current state, success rate of a single engraving is less than 10%, and there is a high likelihood of catastrophic failure due to energy control loss. I don't need to draw it with mental power. Jason's eyes flashed gold. I will brand it with Sun True Fire. He touched the same spot on the Noma's chest again. Silver blue liquid magic surged through his arm. As it left his fingertip, it was sheathed in brilliant golden flame. He constrained the overwhelming force with precise control, shaping it into the finest engraving tool. The energy forced its way into the Noma's innards. Sizzle, crackle. The sound tore through the air, like a red-hot iron plunged into ice. The Noma trembled, spiderweb cracks raced across its surface, and molten gold light burst from the fissures. The puppet's core teetered on the edge of being incinerated into magma. Jason's expression hardened. The second-tier Grandson Codex whirred in his mind, shaping the destructive power into tens of thousands of hair-thin needles of energy, each one a microscopic chisel. He branded the new rune lattice, 700 times more complex, into the core. One more point of energy, and the core would melt. One less point, and the structure would be unstable. Time stretched until the last stroke fell. The new core rune array, intricate as a star chart and faintly golden, stabilized within the Noma. Jason withdrew his finger, sweat beading on his forehead. Click, click, the rock crack sealed, the rough surface smoothing and sharpening into an aesthetic of functional precision. The Noma raised its head. Its dull orange eyes had become deep silver blue, the same hue as Jason's magic. It knelt on one knee and spoke in a steady, mechanical voice. "Noma on standby. Logic core upgraded, capable of executing 3,600 standard rune engraving commands with an accuracy error of less than 1,000th. Requesting task assignment, my master." It had worked. Jason allowed himself a tired but satisfied smile. This wasn't just a single upgrade, it was a production line. "Very good, Noma," he nodded. "Your first task is to replicate everything that just happened to you across your companions. I want an army. I want it now." Command confirmed. The upgraded Noma rose and walked toward the cluster of unmoving rock golems. What followed was industrial and beautiful in its violence. Silver blue arcane energy gushed from its palms, coalescing into two tendrils that plugged into two neighboring bodies. Its new core, a high-speed copier, forced its upgrade data into the targets. 2 became 4, 4 became 8. The numbers grew exponentially. Within hours, a legion of thousands of arcane engineering puppets stood in perfect ranks across the Foundation, their silver blue eyes glinting in the forest shadows, silent and ready. An army of rune-engraving golems had been born. Jason let his awareness sink inward, cataloging, coordinating, the general's mind folding into machine and magic. 126, Void Ghost, activate. Void Ghost, activate. 0, I'm temporarily transferring supreme command of this arcane puppet legion to you. Your new designation is Soul Puppet 0. According to the Divine Concealment Array schematics, decompose, optimize, and assign all basic engineering tasks. I will personally handle only the most core functions. Command accepted. Taking over control of the Puppet Legion, network connected. Optimal construction plan generated. Soul Puppet Zero's mechanical voice echoed through the mental link into every puppet's mind at once. Commander Zero, issuing engineering command number 1. All units, activate. Using the Foundation Center as the origin, follow the spiral matrix path and begin engraving the first layer, the spatial fold main structure rune array. Boom. Over 1,000 arcane engineering puppets moved in perfect unison and stepped forward. The earth trembled. For most Hogwarts students, these 3 weeks had been the last sleepy stretch before Christmas. Professors had grown lax, classes dull, and a general lassitude lay over the castle. But in the heart of this rune-isolated patch of the Forbidden Forest, time had its own rules. There was no day or night here, only an endless, low hum. The puppets, like a silent terracotta army, covered the entire foundation. No longer crude stone giants, their bodies were veined with intricate silver-blue filigree that pulsed like blood beneath rock. From each puppet's fingertips, a thin beam of energy lanced out, scorching the granite underfoot and leaving precise, complex etchings. The air reeked of burned metal and stone, laced with the sharp ozone of ionized magic, a dizzying, strangely exhilarating scent. Jason sat cross-legged in the center of the massive project, the calm eye in the middle of the storm. 3,600 final energy nodes hovered before him, each a bead of moonstone powder and star silver emitting a soft, cool light. His task was to give souls to those nodes. From his fingertip, a wisp of golden flame, sun-true fire, narrowed down to a hair-thin filament, spiraled and pierced the core of one node. This domineering fire was now, under his control, the finest carving tool imaginable. Too much and the node would melt into slag. Too little and the rune structure would not form. It had been 3 weeks of monotonous, maddening labor. He had pushed his mental reserves beyond every limit. They'd broken and rebuilt stronger. Core rune node 3,599, engraving complete. Total project progress 99.9%. Jason opened his eyes. He picked up the last node, its light a faint, warm gold, and fitted it into a reserved groove in the rock beneath him. Click, a tiny, definitive sound, and the weeks-long roar that had filled the clearing vanished. Silence hit like a physical blow, sudden, absolute, a hand clamped over the world. All at once, the 1,000-plus arcane engineering puppets froze, straightening as if hearing a single voice. Their silver-blue eyes turned toward their creator at the foundation's center. They stood motionless and still as mountains. Only the wind in the treetops betrayed the world's continued existence. Jason rose, his robes dusted with stone powder, and walked to the foundation's edge. He crouched, brushed a fingertip over a freshly engraved rune. The rock was still hot. A steady current of magic flowed silently beneath the pattern. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. He straightened and sank his consciousness into the link with the soul puppet. 0. Final report. Divine concealment array. Full system self-check complete. All modules on standby. 4-fold composite stealth system, ready for activation at any time. His gaze swept over the creation, 500 meters by 500 meters, a territory forged by his hands and knowledge, an absolute prototype of a private divine realm. He said 2 words. Activate. Command confirmed. The calm ripped apart. Above the foundation, 87,421 basic runes and 3,600 core runes flared to life at once. Silver-blue magic flooded along the burned circuits, tearing and reconstructing with violent intent. The ground erupted into a radiant star map, as if someone had yanked the Milky Way down and spread it across the earth. Jason felt the space underfoot begin to twist. No, the very fabric of space convulsed. The forest, the distant mountains, smeared and stretched in his vision like wet watercolor. Light stopped moving in straight lines and instead darted about like a spooked school of fish. That immense magical tremor, strong enough to punch through the clouds and be felt across Scotland, was immediately snatched up by an even stronger force. Energy was greedily swallowed and neutralized inward. The world gave a lurch as if a television signal had glitched. A fleeting, indescribable sense of wrongness passed through him, as if someone had fiddled with the universe's rules. Then, just as suddenly, everything settled into an even more thorough normalcy. The light faded. Jason was still standing where he'd stood. Beneath him was solid earth, before him an empty clearing. Behind him, the arcane engineering puppets remained like statues. But the 500 by 500 foundation, the miraculous construction that could have made even Dumbledore sit up and take notice, was gone. Jason stepped onto the spot where the foundation had lain. He stamped his foot. The familiar give of soil met him. He had done it. With arcane knowledge far ahead of his time, he had crafted a perfectly secure prototype of a divine realm that belonged only to him. Reporting Master, Soul Puppet Zero's voice said, breaking the silence. Divine concealment array operating stably. 4-fold barrier functioning nominally. We have disappeared from the world map. Good work, Zero. Jason's smile finally broke free. Ongoing operational monitoring. Warning: energy consumption rate exceeds theoretical model by 320%. Energy system: significant deficit detected. The smile froze. Recalculating based on current consumption rate, pre-charged moonstone nodes will be fully depleted in 6 hours and 39 minutes. At that time, the divine concealment array will be forced to shut down. Soul Puppet Zero's mechanical tone delivered the verdict like a death sentence. 127. Energy black hole. Energy black hole. This stone firmament will reappear before everyone at Hogwarts in the most brilliant and unstoppable way. Jason looked up at the empty sky and could almost see the imagined fireworks, Dumbledore's astonished face in the crowd, the spectacle he had pictured. The countdown still ticked away like a guillotine. He swallowed the churn in his chest and forced himself to breathe. 0. Immediately calculate all conditions for constructing the simplest elemental pool. Now, constructing simplified elemental pool model establishment failed. Reason: ambient elemental concentration 87% below theoretical threshold. Warning: no airborne raw materials available for aggregation. Soul Puppet Zero's voice sliced through his fantasy and laid bare the facts. Jason stood frozen, fingertips tingling as if they still held the warmth of the grand array the moment he'd activated it. 6 hours, 39 minutes remained. His perfect kingdom, his divine concealment array, his floating city dream, had become a ravenous energy sink, stripping the surrounding magic into a widening deficit by the second. Switch to lowest power consumption mode, he ordered. Deactivate the causal disturbance matrix. Deactivate energy field isolation. Keep only the most basic spatial folds. Command accepted. Switching to emergency life support mode. Unloading non-essential modules. Recalculating. Warning: in current mode, high-intensity magic detection may register spatial anomalies. Emergency life support mode sustainable for 6 hours, 37 minutes. Turning off 2 core functions bought him only 2 minutes. Jason's smile was a humorless twist. He paced the soft soil, feeling like he was walking on quicksand, sinking into the territory the array had claimed. Floating city? An arcane empire suspended above the ground? Supplementary: activating floating city will double energy consumption. The divine concealment array will collapse entirely within 17 seconds. Soul Puppet Zero delivered the final clause with clinical precision. Jason stopped mid-step. He had nuclear fusion schematics in his head and, at his feet, only damp kindling. Cutting costs wasn't the answer. He had to increase intake. 0. Solution: retrieving only feasible solution from knowledge base. Solution: anchor to a higher dimensional, energy-rich plane. Establish a cross-space elemental siphon channel and create an artificial elemental pool as a permanent energy core. Cross-plane siphon. Steal energy. Warning: theoretical concept. Risk factors cannot be fully estimated. Simulated potential risks include but are not limited to: 1. Anchor point loses stability, triggering local space collapse, 17% probability. 2. Channel attraction of predators from higher dimensional plane during establishment, 41% probability. Jason cut the report short. Risk is better than dying. First we survive. Retrieve the Gaia's Heart Elemental Pool Complex Blueprint, highest pressure-bearing version. Command confirmed. A structural diagram unfolded in his mind. An inverted pyramid buried deep underground, a lattice of rune circuits and energy conduits woven into a net around a core generator that stabilized a spatial singularity. The whole thing was an energy conversion plant, an artificial elemental pool that could feed the concealment array. Good, dangerous, but possible. He let his gaze sweep over the army of puppets that had stood like statues. A cold flame of intent flared in his eyes. They have new work. Through Soul Puppet Zero, his will flowed into the engineering cores of every arcane puppet. The silence shattered. Thousands of automata activated in a unified surge, becoming an assembly line of the most efficient labor. Hundreds marched toward the center, arms reconfiguring into high-speed alloy drills that bit through bedrock like a knife through cheese. Crushed stone and earth were flung aside by invisible forces as a vast foundation pit formed at an ever-accelerating pace. Another contingent walked toward the distant mountain ranges. Their hands projected slender energy blades that sliced through stone, quarrying enormous blocks with machine precision. Subsequent teams hauled the multi-ton blocks back, grinding and finishing them into load-bearing stones for the inverted pyramid. Nearby, a reserved crew began laying the foundation for a towering spire, the future Mage Tower, the nerve center of his floating city and Jason's private laboratory. He even marked off a plot for a Gothic manor. Even in desperation, standards of living mattered. The construction site bloomed into motion, violent aesthetics and relentless industry. This time the goal was no longer concealment, but creation. Jason stood at the lip of the deep pit, wind whipping his robe, and watched the inverted pyramid's outline take shape. The countdown still hovered above them, but for now his audacious gamble had bought him breathing room. Thousands of puppets moved with the cold, efficient rhythm of his will, cutting mountains, excavating earth, and raising a subterranean complex at a rate that defied common sense. His mind sank into the Arcane Codex to inventory the assets he could wield for this gamble. First, himself. His mental power had quietly broken the barrier into the second stage, leaping to a higher plane. The magic in his body, refined by the Grand Sun Codex, had not only doubled in quantity, but become a concentrated golden liquid, each strand suffused with the brutal, domineering properties of sun-true fire. He was no longer the mage he'd been a month ago. That change was his leverage against the laws of planes. Second, the very array beneath his feet. The divine concealment array was a perfect shield and a ravenous beast. It had given him absolute sanctuary, and it was devouring energy like a black hole. It was his greatest achievement and his heaviest shackle. Third, Soul Puppet Zero and the Puppet Army. The intelligence core that had emerged unexpectedly was now the keystone of his plan, tireless, utterly loyal, and a masterful chief engineer. The puppets were the extension of his will, his hands to turn blueprints into reality. He had time, narrow, dangerous time, and the tools to try to steal sustenance from a higher realm. The countdown guillotine still hung above him, but as the foundations grew beneath the earth, Jason felt the first true movement of a plan that might turn the array's hunger into its salvation. 128. Summer Review and Outlook. The dormant dragon points at the stars and the sea. After reviewing everything, Jason's gaze pierced the void, as if he could already see the warm lights of Hogwarts Castle. He had knowledge, power, tools, and labor, but he lacked people. Puppets could execute, not create. Soul Puppet Zero could optimize, but it had no inspiration. Facing a completely unknown field, he needed more brains, trustworthy partners, and a team of competent, outstanding workers. Several familiar faces formed in his mind. Hermione Granger. He could almost picture her spending the summer hungrily studying the copy of Basic Introduction to Runes he'd left her. With her talent and focus, she could probably already analyze and inscribe simple first-order runes on her own. Her intelligence was the key to unlocking planar theory. She wasn't a worker, she was the future chief researcher, the technical core of the whole project. Fred and George Weasley. The twins were natural alchemists. Their intuition for materials and their delightfully unorthodox ideas couldn't be taught from textbooks. The alchemy notes Jason had left them were, to them, like a gateway to a new world. What did interplanar exploration need? Stabilizers, spatial beacons, emergency escape devices, odd inventions that sometimes required a touch of luck. Those belonged to the twins. They would be the logistics and equipment department, able to turn theory into reality. Jason could already imagine that once the floating city was built, they'd shamelessly demand the best spot in the commercial district to open a Weasley's Wizard Wheezes flagship store. Finally, his thoughts settled on Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, and Jason's expression grew a little more complicated. Ask them to research runes? Harry might mistake them for Quidditch flight paths, and Ron would probably wonder whether rune stones could be used as chess pieces. Ask them to do alchemy? Heaven only knew what explosive contraption they'd conjure. But both of them had the most precious qualities, courage and an uncanny luck favored by fate. They were born warriors and explorers. When a door to a new world needed to be kicked open and someone had to face the unknown, they'd be at the forefront. Harry's lightning magic was swift and fierce. Ron's earth magic was steady and dependable. They might not grasp the full grandeur of the plan, but they would fight with everything they had to protect their friends and plunge into an adventure. Harry would be the sword, Ron the shield, the ideal vanguards for future planner expeditions. A prototype team took shape in Jason's mind. R&D department, Hermione. Equipment department, the Weasley twins. Operations, Harry and Ron, and he himself would be the chief designer and final decision-maker. A new school year is about to begin, Jason whispered. He knew the meditation he'd published had already put him in the limelight. Killing Quirrell and Lord Voldemort's soul fragment had made him the focus of the entire magical world. A tall tree catches the wind. He needed to lie low. In the new term, he would try to be a normal, prodigious student again. Attend classes, study, occasionally discuss harmless, ancient runic academic problems with Hermione in the library, or give tips on the Weasley brothers' firework formulas. In public, he had to be quiet and unobtrusive. Out of sight, however, in a land forgotten by most, a giant dragon would quietly gather strength, its claws and teeth sharpening, making thorough preparations for its next ascent. Soul Puppet Zero, he called, reconnecting his consciousness to the intelligent core. Master, I am here. In my name, prepare 4 different rune books and 2-way mirrors. The first, for Hermione Granger, includes structural conjectures on first-order rune spatial stability and energy guidance, with a few intentionally incorrect models attached, and an introduction pointing toward the basic theory of the heart of Gaia. Command confirmed. Guiding academic documents generated. The second, for Fred and George Weasley, a modified silent firework alchemy formula, in which the core stabilizer material is replaced with stardust. In the postscript, hint that this stabilizer seems to have a peculiar inhibitory effect on spatial fluctuations. Command confirmed. Alchemy formula with hidden information generated. The third, for Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, a holiday greeting casually mentioning that I recently found strange, never-before-seen magical creature footprints on the edge of the Forbidden Forest that seemed to lead somewhere mysterious. Ask if they'd be interested in exploring it together after school starts. Add a note, to prevent Dobby the house elf from intercepting it, deliver via locating Privet's magic, and then use a teleportation spell. Command confirmed. Adventure invitation written, and the 2-way mirrors and rune books in the underground warehouse are being stocked, ready for deployment. Very good. Jason nodded with satisfaction. Encrypt and send these letters. In the Granger family study in the London suburbs, the air smelled of paper and sunlight. Hermione propped her chin on her hand, fingertips tracing lines on a heavy history of medieval magic, but her gaze was unfocused. Summer was halfway over. She had read almost all of next term's textbooks and borrowed a stack of supplementary volumes. The accumulation of knowledge didn't bring the satisfaction she expected. If anything, it left a hollow feeling. First year at Hogwarts had felt like an overly brilliant dream. Trolls, Cerberus, the Philosopher's Stone, and that one person who always seemed a step ahead of everyone, performing miracles with a logic she couldn't quite follow. Jason. She opened the book Jason had left her, Runes, From Beginner to Grave. The pages were dog-eared and crowded with her dense notes. The knowledge felt like a key opening a new door, but she couldn't see what lay beyond. A dusty owl suddenly tapped at the window, impatiently pecking the glass. Hermione didn't recognize it. It wasn't from Hogwarts, and it wasn't Jason's magnificent snowy owl. It had the businesslike air of a hired messenger, as if it were thinking, "Hurry up and pay so I can get back to work." She opened the window. The owl dropped a square parcel on her desk and extended a leg. She fumbled in the biscuit tin for a few nuts, placed them in its claw. The bird weighed the coins, hooted in satisfaction, and flew off. The parcel was wrapped tightly in brown paper, with no return address. Hermione carefully unwrapped it. Inside were 2 items. 129, a rallying call for workers. Hermione found 2 items on the kitchen table. A palm-sized mirror with a dark silver frame, etched in complex patterns she didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar, and a thick stack of parchment manuscripts. The title on the top sheet read, Conjectures on the Structure of First-Order Runes in Spatial Stabilization and Energy Guidance. The handwriting was unmistakably Jason's, sharp, precise, a little impatient. Hermione's heart skipped. She sat up straight as if pulled by a magnet and dove into the pages. No, the energy circuit as arranged here is too redundant. It will cause about 3% dissipation. If these 2 nodes are swapped and a reverse coupling rune is added, Efficiency should increase by at least 5%, she muttered. Oh my, she breathed, reading on. He actually wants to use a folding concept in this spatial stabilization model to counteract microscopic magical disturbances? That's bold, if it works. Her confusion dissolved into exhilaration. This was no polished, finished paper. It was a challenge full of deliberate gaps and baited puzzles. Jason had left several obvious mistakes on purpose, errors that hid a vast, ambitious theoretical framework. On the last page, there was only one sentence. Theory needs practice to verify. Do you want to build it with your own hands? See you in front of the mirror at 8 p.m. She glanced at the mirror on the table, then at the sky outside growing dim. Her heart raced. The dull summer holiday had just ended. At the burrow, Molly's roar echoed through the kitchens and nearly lifted the roof. Fred, George, what are you doing in your room again? I smell sulfur and burnt socks. A clattering commotion from upstairs was followed by the twins' simultaneous indignant chorus. Mum, we're just researching a new silent cleaning charm. Absolutely safe. Before their protest died away, an owl with half its feathers singed, looking like it had been through a cannon blast, crashed through the kitchen window and catapulted a package right into the flower bin with a thump. A white cloud engulfed the room. Fred and George used the confusion to sneak downstairs, each with a piece of bread in his mouth, dig the package out of the flour, and sprint back to their room, leaving a coughing, bewildered Molly behind. Once safe, they unwrapped the package. Sent by Jason? Fred wiped flour off the mirror. It matched the one Hermione had received. Look at this. George held up the parchment with eyes that glittered. Improved potent silent firework formula? He actually tried to perfect our idea. They read avidly. The formula was daring and meticulous, proposing unfamiliar ways to treat materials. The most interesting part was the core stabilizer. Stardust powder, ridiculously expensive, but listen to this note. Fred licked his lips. George read aloud. This stabilizer seems to have a peculiar inhibitory effect on small-scale spatial fluctuations. It is recommended to conduct the initial experiment in a sealed environment, lest your chickens fly onto the neighbor's roof. Spatial fluctuations. They glanced at each other. The look in both their eyes said it all. This wasn't a prank to them anymore. Jason had handed them a key to pry at the laws of space itself, and what the Weasleys excelled at was using keys to open doors that ought not be opened. George, I have an idea. Fred, same thought, George replied. If we put this in a dung bomb, it could appear anywhere at a time we choose, like in Snape's cauldron. At the end of their parchment, the same invitation waited. See you in front of the mirror at 8 p.m. They grinned at each other, matching mischievous smiles. A truly spectacular prank was being hatched. At 12 Grimmauld Place, Sirius Black idly prodded a house elf's preserved head with his wand. He was legally free, but felt more caged than ever. The Order's activity was cryptic, and Dumbledore kept telling him to be patient. He felt like a sheathed sword beginning to rust. Then an owl arrived with Jason's package. Inside was no manuscript, only a mirror and a short note. I am building something that will change everything. I need the most reliable guardian and an expert to help me transport special materials right under the Ministry's nose. You are the only choice. Sirius stared at the note. Between Jason's spare lines, he read trust and unbridled ambition. He wasn't being asked to be protected or restrained. He was being needed. He picked up the mirror. Its cold, rough metal spoke to his restless youth with James, and for the first time in months, something like the old blood surged through him. Exactly at 8, Hermione, Fred, George, and Sirius, each in their own rooms, touched their mirrors. The surfaces rippled like liquid, then familiar faces assembled, like a small video conference. Hey, Hermione, your hair is still a mess, Fred teased, the first to break the silence. Sirius, how are you in on this? Hermione asked, surprised. Sirius gave a conspiratorial wink at the others. Then the pictures slid aside, and Jason's calm face filled the mirror. He sat against a dark background, a few faint lights outlining his silhouette so he looked almost like a figure on a throne. Good evening, he said. It seems my invitation reached all of you, his voice continued through the glass. Jason, what are you up to? George demanded. Jason's mouth twitched. The floating city needs your help. I've inscribed a teleportation enchantment on the back of this mirror. It can be used twice. enough to bring you there. Hermione hesitated. I'll need my parents' permission before I go, or they'll think I've been kidnapped, although that does sound kind of exciting. Jason smiled. Of course. Once you decide, channel magic into the two-way mirror and teleport over. 130. Soul contract and teleportation point. As Jason spoke, the image in the two-way mirror flared and trembled. A new face shoved in, crowding Fred out of the frame. It was Harry Potter, huddled in a cramped dark space. The camera shook so badly that only his bright green eyes and the lightning-shaped scar on his forehead were clearly visible. Jason? Harry's voice was thin. It's really you. I haven't received a single one of your letters. But I got the mirror. Please, you have to get me out of here now. Everyone at the burrow went silent. George blinked in disbelief. Didn't receive letters? Impossible. We sent several owls. And they came with our latest improved belch candies, Fred added, incredulous. Harry sounded on the verge of tears. Nothing. Uncle Vernon nailed the windows shut. Ever since that house elf appeared, I've been treated like a prisoner. I'm basically locked in here except to go to the bathroom. I don't want to spend another second here. Jason listened calmly. Everything fit his expectations. That self-righteous house elf named Dobby had been more than happy to protect Harry, and in so doing had blocked all outside contact. Dobby would not be able to stop Harry at the station later, though. Once school started, Jason planned to secure that notebook in advance, perhaps harvest a little soul material to upgrade 0. Harry, don't rush, Jason said through the mirror, his voice clear to everyone watching. The blood magic your parents left will shelter you for a while. Now listen carefully. Lock your door and make sure no one disturbs you. And whatever you do, leave a note explaining where you went. There was a rustle from Harry's side, then the dull thud of a door being bolted. Done, he said, the sound of someone burning bridges. Using the mirror's dim light, he scribbled a short message. Jason's gaze swept over every face reflected in the glass. Hermione's worry, the Weasley twins' curiosity, Sirius's mix of anticipation and apprehension. He let the mood turn solemn. Before you come over, a few rules must be made clear, he said. The place I'm taking you to is my most important secret. This isn't an ordinary visit. It's an invitation to join a major undertaking. You've all already signed the contract, except Sirius. Sirius has to sign now. From the darkness behind Jason, a silhouette materialized and stepped into the mirror's weak light. It wasn't human. It looked like a puppet, a near 2-meter-tall metal construct of dull black alloy that seemed to drink in light. Intricate silver-blue filigree lined its body like living veins, glowing faintly beneath its metallic skin. Its head was a smooth, featureless ovoid, punctured only by a single icy blue lens. When that lens rotated and scanned each person in turn, the chill it sent through everyone felt as if it pierced the glass. This is Soul Puppet 0, Jason introduced, my most capable assistant and the witness and executor of the contract you are about to sign. He tapped the mirror with a fingertip. Golden ripples spread across Sirius's pane. Tiny arcane runes rose up from the waves, weaving and spiraling until a complex, vertiginous, three-dimensional magic circle hung in front of them. Wow, that's awesome! I want one! Late Ron squeezed into the frame. Hermione's scholar's instincts flared. This isn't the same contract we signed before, she murmured, nearly aloud. This structure doesn't bind ordinary magic or life. It acts on the underlying logic of the soul itself. Those who violate it won't be punished in the usual sense. Their knowledge of this secret, or even their existence in relation to it, could be erased. Sirius watched the shifting circle, and for the first time let a truly serious expression cross his usually light face. Having dealt with dark arts and ancient vows, he appreciated the gravity of what he was being asked to bind himself to. He stepped forward and placed his palm against the mirror. The golden sigils reacted instantly. A strand of light shot out, coiled around his wrist, and then sank away as if claiming a part of him. Shouldn't we record this? Fred asked, eager. No need, Jason replied. You already signed the contract with me before. I have your information recorded. His voice shifted into an emotionless, synthesized tone that echoed in the minds of the six watching, setting teeth on edge. All right, welcome aboard, Jason smiled at last. Now, everyone, steady yourselves. He snapped his fingers. The surfaces of the four two-way mirrors melted into deep, swirling silver-blue vortices. A powerful suction bled from the centers, sucking at the edges of the frame as if trying to pull their very souls through. "Little wizards, hold on tight," Sirius shouted, and was the first to be drawn wholly into the mirror. The Weasley twins tumbled after him, shouting and laughing as they were dragged in, Ron close behind, his exclamations swallowed by the vortex. Hermione squeezed her eyes shut and let the Force take her. After letting her parents in on things, she had done what needed doing. Finally, in that cramped, oppressive cupboard on Privet Drive, Harry's face was suddenly a portrait of relief and longing. The silver-blue light swallowed him up. The tearing, dizzy sensation of space bending and snapping around them hadn't yet faded when Ron's heavy, almost strangled gasp came from beside Harry. Merlin's beard. 131. "Welcome to the kingdom of God, my first batch of workers." Harry followed Ron's rigid stare downward. Beneath their feet yawned a void. No earth, no clouds, only the landscape hundreds of meters below, spread out like a meticulously drawn map. Forests, lakes, winding rivers, every feature plainly visible. They seemed to be suspended in midair, as if held up by an invisible hand. The sensation of weightlessness, coupled with a solid surface underfoot, produced a dizzying contradiction that left them momentarily stunned. "Oh my goodness," Hermione breathed, crouching and cautiously reaching a fingertip toward the transparent nothingness. Her finger met cold, solid air, an invisible barrier she could feel, faintly pulsing with energy. Sirius Black scanned the surroundings like a panther before a hunt, eyes sweeping every angle for threats or escape routes. He breathed heavily, a mix of excitement and the pressure of facing something unknown and vast, something stranger even than Azkaban. "An illusion?" he muttered. "No, this is too big. It's a multi-dimensional space distortion and concealment array," Jason said from nearby. Only then did they all notice him standing in front of them. Behind him floated a completely black metal construct, Soul Puppet Zero. Silent in the air like his most loyal shadow, a cold sculpture waiting to move. "From the outside, this looks empty," Jason explained as the transparent floor extended to the horizon. "From the inside, it's the best viewing platform. And I ran an alchemical array yesterday to convert this section so you can actually see the ground below." "A miracle." Fred flopped onto the transparent floor, face nearly pressed against it, eyes shining. George followed suit without hesitation. "No, this is a business opportunity," he said. "Fred, imagine if we opened Weasley Aerial Amusement Park here. Ticket sales alone would pile up into a mountain of galleons every day. A cloud restaurant, a holy spot for couples. Sky bungee, cloud gliding, an aerial Quidditch pitch, the coolest pitch ever." They jabbered like they were under an acceleration charm, already half-drafting a business plan and debating whether to give Jason a few dry shares. Cloud real estate clearly had limitless value in their minds. "You two, shut up!" Ron shouted, but even he ended up lying down beside them, legs trembling. "Seriously, this is so high. We won't fall, will we?" "Theoretically, not until the energy maintaining the array runs out," Hermione said, having risen. Her scholarly curiosity had pushed aside her fear. "Jason, for an array this massive, the energy consumption must be enormous. How did you solve the power problem?" Jason's expression tightened slightly. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he nodded toward Zero. "Let me introduce properly. This is Soul Puppet Zero, my chief alchemical assistant and engineering supervisor. Call him Zero." Zero's single cold lens swept across each of them as if scanning. He raised a metal arm and, palm up, shot a beam of ice-blue light that solidified into a huge, intricate three-dimensional holographic projection, the internal structure of the city beneath them, runic lines and energy nodes pulsing with light. "Project Divine Realm," Zero intoned, his voice echoing inside their heads. "Future floating city total area, 500,000 square meters, equivalent to 700 standard Quidditch pitches." 700 pitches? Ron gawked. "That's bigger than Hogwarts." Fred and George blurted at once, eyes already full of the galleon-sized possibilities. "Bigger than Diagon Alley." Hermione's brow furrowed with a different worry. "How many people will it take to build something this large?" "Currently, basic framework completion, 100%. Basic infrastructure completion, 15%. 2,228 construction puppets," Zero replied. 2,228. Harry looked around bewildered. Apart from those standing there, where were the workers? A curve touched Jason's mouth. Zero. Zero's lens flickered and he hummed low. The floating city itself seemed to shiver. From beneath the transparent floor, from within the unfinished skeletons of buildings, rose a dense, orderly, mechanical roar. A dark tide of steel surged up, machines of every shape. Some looked like giant spiders, 8 mechanical legs tracing complex paths in the air. Others resembled flying beetles with multi-tool arms beneath them. Taller humanoid engineering constructs strode through the space. Each had a task: breaking rock, energy welding, rune engraving. Sparks flew, beams of power crisscrossed, no army, but a living, terrifyingly efficient magical factory, silently consuming raw materials and producing miracles. All puppets? Hermione gasped, hand going to her wand as if to anchor herself. 2,228 basic construction units, Zero confirmed. In his projection, a red energy bar in the lower right ticked downward. Work efficiency, 8.7 times a standard wizard. No holidays, no salary. However, at maximum power, energy reserves will be depleted in 17 hours. The announcement snapped everyone taut. Hermione's face grew grave as she looked at Jason, a silent question in her eyes. Sirius's expression hardened into a dark, calculating scowl, not admiring the industrial prowess so much as figuring the consequences if such power were misused, and the price that power demanded. "This is practically an industrial revolution," Hermione murmured, staring at the humming machines. "No wonder you had to keep it secret. If the Ministry of Magic found out you had this, and what it relies on." She didn't finish the sentence. Everyone understood what she meant. Fred and George had already circled the closest puppets once, eyes bright and covetous, clearly plotting how to get their hands on at least 2 of them. 132, Arcane Division of Labor, Academic Bully, Thug, and Zero's Alchemy Apprentice. "Jason, can these little darlings be rented out?" Fred asked, rubbing his hands together. "We've got a brilliant idea," George added. "If we use them to haul our stock." "Don't even think about it," Jason cut in without hesitation, his gaze sweeping over the busy corridor of whirring metal. "They're custom built. They only do construction work." He clapped once, calling everyone back to attention. "All right, the marveling's over." His expression hardened. "Now I need to tell you why I called you here. Maintaining an invisibility array of this size is taking more magic than I expected," he said, pointing to the steadily shrinking energy bar on Zero's projection. "The current focusing array is inefficient. We need new energy sources." "New energy?" Hermione switched on in scholar mode immediately. "Planar exploration?" The name hung in the air, heavy enough to make everyone hold their breath. "We need to travel to other worlds to find more efficient magical sources," Jason said. Sirius whistled. "Is that why you wanted us to sign that contract?" "Partly," Jason replied. "This plan is too advanced to be public. If it leaks, the Ministry will come asking questions, and plenty of others will want what's here. So I need people I can trust." He looked each of them over. "So, are you in?" Fred and George exchanged a grin, then answered together, "Of course, but we have one condition." "What condition?" "When it's finished, the best spot in the commercial district belongs to us." Jason's smile was slow and faint. "Deal. But are the 2 of you content with opening branches in just this one city?" He didn't give them time to answer. "Hermione, you'll take the theoretical work on the planar stabilizer. Zero will assist you with the derivations." He turned to Sirius. "We need a secure material transfer station and supply route. That's your job." Finally, his gaze landed on Harry and Ron. "And you 2, are you ready for a real adventure?" "Sirius, I need a reliable external channel," Jason added. "No problem. What are we moving?" Sirius lifted his chin, the familiar "leave it to me" grin appearing. 5 tons of various magical materials a day, bypassing the Ministry's scrutiny. Sirius's smile froze. 5 tons? He rubbed an ear like he'd misheard. "Jason, are you planning to take down Hogwarts for firewood?" Jason tossed a heavy money pouch from the inside of his robe. It thudded onto the floor. The rattle of galleons made Ron's eyes go wide. 10,000 galleons as seed money. Sirius weighed the bag in his hand, and his whole expression changed, like a hound catching a scent. Routes and contacts he'd dealt with on the fringes of the law flickered through his mind. Dangerous, yes, but thrilling. exactly what he craved after years of confinement. 3 days. I'll have your first supply line. Don't tell me you robbed Gringotts, kid. Jason turned back to Hermione. Hermione, the theory is yours. Zero's single-lens camera lit up. A beam projected a rotating nebula of symbols in front of her, countless runes arranged in shifting patterns. Zero's voice, cold and neutral, slipped directly into her thoughts. Database authorized. Contains first-order runes. Total 7,320 runes. 7,000. Hermione breathed. This is more than all the resources in the Hogwarts archive. She reached out as if to touch the floating sigils, eyes shining with the kind of fanatic joy that comes from discovering an untouched trove. Can I live here? This is a treasure the magical world has never seen. Jason smiled. You can study here, but none of the material may be removed. Hermione barely looked up, already arranging mental categories, planning a logical system to catalog the runes. Jason's gaze swept to Harry and Ron. You two, combat training. Zero will simulate everything, from basic dueling to operations you'll need on site. Legendary combat, Ron shouted, leaping forward. Way better than Quidditch. This isn't schoolhouse play, Jason said with a tight smile. Zero, show them. Zero's lens turned. The transparent floor beneath their feet shimmered with faint light as runes and contours traced themselves into a near-real training arena. The air took on a faint sulfurous tang, the simulation's hint of dark arts residue, making their skin prickle. Zero's voice filled their heads. Magic combat simulation activated. Difficulty, beginner. Objective, neutralize a simulated Death Eater squad of 3. Wait, Death Eaters? Harry gripped his wand, face paling. The simulation sparked a realistic sense of fear. Ron's nerves tensed too, but both were swept by a wild thrill. It's just a simulation, Jason said. But every spell and move will be analyzed. Zero will point out your mistakes and give you the optimal responses. 3 figures in black robes coalesced in the field, skull masks and green wand tips gleaming. The simulated killing intent was almost tangible. Instead of backing down, Harry's adrenaline spiked with excitement. He was ready to test himself. Jason's eyes lingered on the Weasley twins. You two have the most important task. Fred and George straightened, puffing their chests. Alchemical conversion. Under Zero's guidance, convert base metals into high-purity magic conductors. We're alchemy experts, Fred proclaimed, thumping his chest, oblivious to how daunting the assignment would be. Our skunk bomb recipe is a century ahead of its time, George added, grinning. Zero's camera focused on them. A cold blue light washed over their faces, making the hairs on their necks stand up as if charged. 133. Zero's warning. Task requirements. Purity no less than 99.7%. Impurity content no more than 0.3%. Energy conductivity at least 120% above the standard value. Fred's smile froze. His usual alchemy experiments suddenly felt childish, mud compared to what this demanded. Zero's voice was flat and mechanical, yet every word landed like an icicle. The average success rate for a standard alchemist is 73%. Your goal is 85% or higher. Any product below standard will be considered waste and subjected to atomic-level decomposition. Atomic-level decomposition? George swallowed. This wasn't like throwing a failed firecracker into the trash. This was annihilation down to the smallest particle. If one part is substandard, we'll all fall apart and turn into a puddle of flesh, Jason said in a level tone, without a hint of a joke. The twins went white. For the first time they understood, this wasn't a dazzling display of magic infrastructure. They were facing a deadly trial. Zero's metal body drifted toward the distant alchemy laboratory. It wasn't the twins' shabby kitchen anymore, but a futuristic chamber of precision instruments. Massive alchemy arrays hovered, energy-focusing mirrors gleamed, and strange devices they'd never seen radiated a clinical, efficient atmosphere. Phase 1 training, basic metal identification and purification. Commence immediately. 2 protective suits, etched with silver runes, unfolded and flew over to cover the twins, fitting them like second skins. A faint flow of magic in the suits made them feel unusually secure. Wow! Fred flexed an arm. The suit was so light it felt weightless. We look like professional alchemists. More like astronauts getting ready for a moonwalk, George muttered, curiosity probing through his fear. Zero's voice issued another cold instruction. The protective suits have built-in life monitoring. If dangerous magical radiation is detected, A protective barrier will automatically activate. A fist-sized lump of tarnished silver sat on the experimental table. Zero extended a mechanical hand. A hair-thin beam of energy lanced from a fingertip. Where it touched the silver, impurities were stripped away layer by layer. Beneath the darkened crust, a mirror-like luster emerged, a faint halo of silver swirling as if the metal had woken. What kind of technique is that? Fred's eyes widened. He'd never seen such precise alchemy. This was less magic than uncanny science. Molecular-level precision cutting. By modulating energy frequency, different components can be selectively separated. Zero explained. Better than magic, George breathed, feeling the algebra of his old alchemy look crude, like cavemen rubbing sticks. Now it's your turn. Perform the purification operation using the method I just demonstrated. 2 fresh silver ingots slid into place. Fred took a deep breath, pointed his wand, and tried to copy Zero. His beam wavered. A curl of black smoke rose from the surface without any hint of purification. Error. Energy output fluctuation exceeded threshold by 37%. Correction. Adjust the output power of the wand tip to the minimum, then increase slowly by increments of 0.1% until a faint resonance is detected. George fared worse. His cauldron hissed, the edges of his ingot blackened and gave off a burnt smell. Improper technique had caused damage. Error. Uneven heat conduction causing secondary damage to the crystal structure. Correction. Use the concentration charm to stabilize energy flow and ensure even heating. How is this even possible? Fred's panic crept in. Sweat beaded on his forehead. This wasn't the sloppy magic they'd practiced at home. This was surgical control. Zero's voice offered a clinical prognosis. Based on calculations, after 15 cycles of corrective training, your success rate will reach 85%. Training time, 3 hours. 3 hours? George gaped, as if Zero had handed down a sentence. We take a whole day to get a new formula right, and even then it's not guaranteed. My teaching efficiency is 15.7 times that of a standard wizard. You will master the necessary skills within 3 hours. They exchanged a look of mutual despair. This machine's inhuman precision made them feel helpless and exposed. All right, we'll try again. Fred forced a sigh and lifted his wand, reluctant but determined. George's eyes drifted around the lab and landed on a small bottle of colored powder in a corner, the upgraded version of their color-changing reagent, capable of creating unusual energy fluctuations briefly. He winked at Fred. Years of tacit understanding did the rest. They weren't trying to sabotage the test, just optimize. Maybe a little catalytic life would make the inert metal respond more willingly. George angled his wand and tried to weave in a catalytic spell they'd used when inventing an instant hair growth potion. He thought he was discreet, even blocking Zero's view with his body. The magic touched the silver, and the lab erupted. A shrill alarm cut through the room. Red warning lights strobed, the air turned tense. Zero's single lens flashed blood red and locked onto George. Its mechanical arm snapped out like lightning and closed around George's wand. The cold metal knuckles sent a chill through him. He felt a raw force from Zero's fingers lock every magical circuit in the wand. It went cold and heavy, useless. Zero's voice was icier than the metal it was made of. Warning. Unauthorized life system magic intervention detected. Experimental parameters deviated by 0.3%. Potential risk. Structural disintegration rate increased by 15%. Level 1 violation recorded. George stammered. Cold sweat beaded on his skin. I only wanted to improve it a little. Zero did not release the wand. Instead, it held it up to George's eyes. Invalid explanation. Any unauthorized intervention will be considered destruction of the cornerstone of the divine realm. Punishment. This wand will enter a 24-hour energy lock. George went ashen, paler than the waste material Zero would decompose. 134. The top student was ecstatic. The thugs were in position, and there were 2 unlucky alchemy apprentices. Fred watched the dull wand trapped in his brother's metal-knuckled grip and felt his blood run cold. It was just a catalyzing spell, George forced the words out. I swear I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to make it more vibrant. What vibrancy do you expect from a dead object? Fred snapped. He hadn't been quick enough to stop it. It had already happened. Zero's single eye glowed an unsettling red, a precise instrument calculating at high speed. The laboratory seemed to drop several degrees. Data analysis, unauthorized life element magic detected. Components, 53% catalytic elements, 27% activity enhancers, 20% unknown mutation-inducing agents. Mutation, Jason, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. His finger tapped unconsciously at his arm and stopped. Zero waved a mechanical arm. A holographic replay sprang into the air, recording George's every movement in perfect detail. The slight flick of his wrist, the barely perceptible fluctuation of the spell. The operator added an unauthorized spell during the third step of the standard procedure. The silver ingot in the projection was magnified. The neat crystal structure diagram showed dislocations invisible to the naked eye, like a bent hairspring in a perfectly tuned clock. This action caused a crystal structure deviation of 0.3. What does that matter? It looks perfectly fine, Fred protested, instinctively drawing his wand and pointing it at Zero, a basic protective gesture. Let him go. It's just a small mistake. Before he could finish, another black metal arm shot from Zero's torso at an impossible speed. Its tip was not a hand, but a circular device that hummed low. Fred felt his wand arm go numb. All strength vanished. The wand clattered to the floor. The device hovered in front of him, the center glowing with an oppressive energy, like a coiled serpent ready to strike. Fred froze, a cold bead of sweat tracing his temple. Jason's shadow fell over them as he gave the order to Zero in a voice colder than falling steel. Let them see the consequences of this small mistake. Zero placed the flawed ingot into a simulated diagram of the floating city's core energy conduction array. The projection animated. When high-pressure magic surged through the system, the deviant point in the silver ingot flared with a brilliant white light, material collapse. Cracks webbed across the ingot, and it disintegrated under the pressure. That was the first domino. The out-of-control energy breached adjacent nodes and triggered more violent failures. The core's conduction array emitted a silent, invisible shriek as rune nodes died one after another. The chain reaction exceeded everyone's imagination. The simulation expanded to show the floating city beneath their feet. The field that kept it aloft began to stutter like a failing lamp and then vanished. In the projection, the massive steel dome lost lift and started to tilt, tumbling like a boulder hurled from the sky, plummeting hundreds of meters toward the ground. The image froze on the burning, twisted ruin below. Cognitive error. Zero's voice was flat and merciless. Final assessment. Structural collapse. Floating city crashed. No survivors. George's legs gave out. He stumbled backward and was halted by another mechanical arm that had appeared behind him. Pinned, he stared blankly at the devastation he had caused. I didn't know, he croaked. Jason walked slowly toward them, his calm more terrifying than any shout. After a long moment, he turned to Zero. Execute mandatory correction procedure. No, Jason, we've learned, really, Fred pleaded at last. Zero's chest slid open soundlessly, exposing gears and runes, and a crystal sphere at its core that glowed a soft blue. Education program initiated. Please relax. Resistance will deepen mental burden. 2 shafts of blue light shot from the crystal, ignoring their wills and enveloping the twins. Fred and George stiffened. Their eyes went hollow. Then their bodies convulsed, racked by violence that had nothing to do with the real world. Choking sounds tore from their throats, veins throbbing at their temples as their eyes rolled beneath shut lids. They writhed through images, the melting metal, choking toxic fumes, Hermione's screams in the simulated crash. Muscles alternately clenched like iron and slumped like dead weight. Their skin flickered hot and cold. Jason watched without a flicker of mercy. He wanted engineers who would obey orders absolutely, not craftsmen who might blow up an entire city. 10 seconds stretched into centuries. Then the light died. Both boys collapsed to the floor, gasping, drenched in sweat, leaving 2 quivering shapes on the stone. Their eyes were wide with a fear that blended awe and crushing humiliation. George's lips trembled. His mind lingered on the sensory horrors the simulation had fed him. He could not form a whole sentence. Fred leaned against the wall and dry-heaved a few times before propping himself up, staring at Zero with no trace of humor or defiance. Zero's chest sealed itself, its single eye easing back to deep blue. Education complete. Please continue the experiment. They picked up their spare wands. Their hands still shook, but every movement now had an obsessive textbook precision. Each step, Each fraction of magical output was executed as if by rote. An hour later, a silver ingot radiating a pure halo cooled in the alchemy array. Qualified. Purity 99.8%. Energy conduction efficiency 121%. Fred and George exchanged a look that contained equal parts relief and gratitude, survivors who had narrowly avoided disaster. Jason stepped forward and traced the newly finished ingot with a fingertip, feeling the steady flow of energy within. His gaze drifted to Zero. What memories were you accessing just now? Zero's eye flickered. Memories of failure. There was the tiniest stutter in the synthetic voice, like a foreign data stream interrupting it. Memories about the cost. Jason's finger paused. Were those memories yours? No, Zero responded, but I can use them. 135. Meditation method is the second pot of gold. Diagon Alley at the end of July was louder than usual. The line outside Flourish and Blots snaked from the storefront all the way to the entrance of Nocturne Alley. Wizards waved galleons and traded the same name, Jason Lester. Meditation, Advanced Edition, limited to 5,000 copies. I heard it's even better than the first, triples a second year's power. The Malfoys even sent people to grab copies. Inside the floating city's concealment array, Jason stood on the transparent floor and looked down at the bustle below. An owl beat past and dropped a Gringotts envelope at his feet. He slid it open and scanned the figures. The galleon amount ended in 4 zeros, enough to buy half the shops in Diagon Alley. Zero's mechanical body glided up behind him, silent as ever. Gringotts' account balance has exceeded 100,000 galleons. Anomaly detected. Queries for your personal information increased by 347%. Where from? Jason asked. Sources of queries. Ministry of Magic Archives, 23 times. Pure Blood Family Alliance, 41 times. Unknown third parties, 15 times. Zero's single lens turned to him. Recommendation: activate Deep Intelligence Gathering Protocol. Jason nodded. He had expected attention. A 12-year-old suddenly flush with money would raise eyebrows. Start it. Runes along Zero's chassis glowed. It extended a mechanical arm and fired a beam of blue light. The beam unfolded into a three-dimensional network map that blanketed the floating city's interior. Countless points of light flickered. Newspapers, owl mail, fireplace network call logs, Gringotts transaction trails, even drunken gossip from a back-alley pub. Everything Zero could perceive lit up as nodes. Information parsing in progress. Target keywords: Jason Lester, meditation, source of wealth. Impressive. Sirius, carrying a newly signed contract, emerged from the experimental wing. I've sorted the supply chain for 5 tons of magical materials, but the price is 30% higher than expected. Why? Everyone thinks someone who can order that much at once must be loaded, Sirius said with a shrug. They're digging for dirt. Several red dots blinked across Zero's map. Alert. High-level interest detected. Lucius Malfoy has dispatched private investigators to Hogwarts. Objective: obtain Jason Lester's file. Malfoy. Jason frowned. He'd expected the name sooner or later, but not this quickly. Data integration complete. Threat assessment, medium. The House of Malfoy, with Muggle World assets, totals roughly 2 million galleons and wields deep influence in the Ministry of Magic. Current intent: commercial acquisition or political pressure. What does he want? Sirius asked. Zero projected more detailed intelligence. Malfoy Manor's layout, Lucius's recent social engagements, intercepted private conversations with other pureblood families. Intercepted communications indicate Malfoy believes you possess ancient magical knowledge of extraordinary value. He is coordinating with other families to propose cooperation. Cooperation? Sirius sneered. In our world, that usually means they get your secrets and tell you to disappear. The timing stung. The new school year was approaching, and whispers about the Chamber of Secrets were already stirring. Being targeted by pureblood families now would only complicate matters. What exactly have they found? Jason asked. Limited. They have access to your Hogwarts records, frequency of contact with Dumbledore, and large Gringotts deposits. Core secret remains secure. Zero's voice took on a different cadence. Recommendation: initiate contact. Seize the initiative. Initiate contact, Jason echoed. Yes, better to show them what you want them to see than to wait for them to dig for the truth. Jason considered the suggestion. It wasn't a cold statistical conclusion so much as a political intuition. Shape the narrative before they did. Where did you learn strategies like that? Zero's lens flickered. Experience records present in database. Whether that experience came from its stored memories or elsewhere, the advice made sense. It was smarter to lead than to react. Do it. Jason turned to Sirius. Can you arrange a meeting with Malfoy? Of course. Sirius gave a dangerous smile. Our families have history. I can arrange an accidental encounter. Zero updated the plan. Suggested contact, Borgin and Burke's, Nocturne Alley. Time, tomorrow evening. Pretext, purchase of rare alchemical materials. Borgin and Burke's. Sirius raised an eyebrow. That old shop deals in dark artifacts and the Malfoys frequent it. It's risky, but I can make it happen. Perfect. Jason's mouth curved. Conducting business in a dangerous place makes us look harder to intimidate. Zero's lens pivoted to the window. New alert. Abnormal access request detected in the Ministry of Magic archives. Someone requesting your birth records and lineage files. Lineage? Jason's eyes narrowed. This was unexpected. Applicant Dolores Umbridge. Purpose, routine review by the Department of Education. Sirius went pale. Umbridge is involved? That's bad. She's more dangerous than the Malfoys. She carries the Ministry. Umbridge's interest meant the situation had escalated beyond private curiosity. The Ministry itself was sniffing. Jason thought for a moment. Zero, prepare a flawless identity file. Prepared? Sirius's hands tightened. You mean you're going to... Already implanted into Ministry systems tonight. The word hung in the laboratory. Even Jason felt a jolt. Zero's efficiency had a cold, unmagical edge. The room fell into a stunned silence as the implications settled in. They were no longer merely reacting to attention. They were shaping what the world would find when it looked. 136. The price of a miracle. A deal Snape can't refuse. Hacking the Ministry of Magic's archives wasn't something an ordinary alchemy puppet could pull off. The archives weren't networked. They were magically protected documents. What other functions do you have? Jason asked cautiously. The puppet's capabilities were starting to feel outrageous. Zero's answer was vague. More abilities can be unlocked as needed. The ambiguity sent a chill down his spine. Sirius shook his head and offered a wry smile. I'm beginning to think following you was the craziest decision I've ever made. Jason patted his shoulder. Crazy is fun, isn't it? As night fell, soft magical lights came alive throughout the floating city. Hermione was still buried in rune research in the lab. The Weasley twins were undergoing alchemy training under Zero's supervision. Harry and Ron were sweating through combat simulations. Everyone prepared for the coming challenges, though none of them yet knew the true storm was only just beginning. Jason stood at the edge of the transparent floor, watching the shimmering projection of London's lights in the distance. 100,000 galleons had drawn him attention like a beacon and placed him squarely in the sights of his enemies. Malfoy, Umbridge, and unseen foes in the shadows all waited, eager for any sign of weakness. That, however, played to his advantage. Taking the initiative was better than waiting to be struck. He wasn't alone. Zero's abilities exceeded expectations, and the team's strength was growing fast. More importantly, he still held a trump card, his premonition about the Chamber of Secrets and Tom Riddle's diary. Soon, the real game would begin. In the underground classroom at Hogwarts, the air always carried the bitter tang of herbs and the stale scent of preservation magic. Severus Snape stood in front of his great oak table, staring at a pool of black, smoking, viscous semi-solid in his cauldron. His face was harder to look at than the foul brew. He had spent 3 days, decimating half his rare stocks, trying to restore a lost soul's soothing potion, and had failed again and again. A knock sounded at the door at the worst possible moment. Do not disturb me, he snapped, sharply annoyed. Professor, it's me, Jason Lester. The voice at the door was calm. Snape's motion froze. His obsidian eyes flashed with irritation at being interrupted. He flicked his wand, and the latch slid open on its own. Mr. Lester, he drawled, if you're here to flaunt how your sensational meditation has made the papers again, I'm afraid I'm in no mood to admire it. Jason stepped inside and shut the door, cutting out the corridor's light. He set a heavy leather folder on the cold stone and pushed it toward Snape. It thudded against the base of the cauldron. A trade, Professor, he said. What's inside for some materials from your stores? Snape's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. He untied the folder with slow, deliberate movements, as if unwrapping a tedious prank. When he unfolded the parchment and took in the array diagram, his expression froze. The rune structure was like nothing he had seen, neither purely alchemical nor purely potion work, but a rigorous, audacious fusion of both. It combined strict logic with bold conception and struck a chord in him he had thought long dead. An advanced potion purification array? Snape said, instantly recognizing its implications. It can purify a potion's active ingredients to near-perfect purity with almost zero side effects. His gaze sharpened, surgical and cold. Its core energy circuit directly mimics ancient Celtic aggregation runes, but uses Norse runology for inverse deconstruction. That method has always been considered impossible. It leads to energy implosion. Where did you filch this scrap of nonsense? Jason stayed unnervingly calm under the scrutiny. The fifth main circuit does pose an implosion risk, he conceded, pointing to a tiny node on the diagram. So I added a three-phase stabilizing current. It borrows concepts from goblin forging heat transfer. It won't stop implosion, but it channels and converts the implosion into the centrifugal force needed for purification. Snape's pupils narrowed. Goblin forging techniques? A boy of 12 talking about lost goblin methods? It wasn't merely genius, it was obscene. Words are cheap, Snape said, measuring him for a long beat. Then he took down the most common bottle of calming draught from a shelf. He did not copy the diagram blindly. Instead, relying on his own deep knowledge, he made several intricate modifications to the energy circuits and set the array up himself. It was both a verification and a test. If Jason's reasoning was wrong, the array would detonate at his feet. Snape's movements were precise and uncompromising, the wand an extension of his will. Half an hour later, with the last rune drawn, the whole array began to hum softly. A drop of liquid, as clear as crystal, condensed at the array's center and fell. It hovered a moment in midair, emitting a calm, moonlight-like glow that swept away the failing, acrid odor and replaced it with a fresh scent of tranquility. Snape caught it on a silver spoon. He didn't need a full magical analysis. From the subtle fluctuation of power alone, he could tell he'd never seen its like. 99.7%, he murmured, voice tight with disbelief. This is impossible. Jason broke the silence. So, can we begin the trade, Professor? Snape inhaled slowly, tamping down the turmoil the discovery had caused. He returned to his usual austere posture, as if the man who had just reacted wasn't him. Speak, what do you want? Dragon's blood, 10 pints. Unicorn tail hair, 1 pound. Phoenix tears, 3 vials, Jason said, enumerating. Then, and a geothermal crystal core. A geothermal crystal core. Snape's brows knitted in a frown. He interrupted, voice sharp. Lester, do not push your luck. The other items, even if precious, would be a fair bargain for this diagram. But a geothermal crystal core is another matter entirely. Its value far exceeds this parchment, and, likely, far exceeds your imagination. Jason was quiet for a moment, weighing whatever calculation he was making. Then, just as Snape thought the boy would back down, Jason unfolded another sheet of parchment and laid it gently on the table. 137. Planar anchoring device prototype. Precision engineering, led by Zero. The parchment felt old under Jason's fingers, its fibers carrying a faint, patient aura of time. Across its surface were neat, deliberate runes. Permanent potion storage rune. It can preserve the activity of any potion perfectly for 100 years, Jason said softly, temptation heavy in his voice. Magic dissipates at less than 1,000th of the normal rate. Snape's breathing hastened. If the first blueprint had been a revolution, this one was a miracle. For a potion master, it was irresistible, an ultimate treasure that outshone everything else. He snatched the parchment, greedily scanning the symbols, his face moving through ecstasy, disbelief, shock. Deal, he managed through clenched teeth. Snape pushed 2 words out and then moved like a man possessed. He went to the farthest recesses of the Chamber of Secrets, opened a cabinet sealed with a dozen malicious wards, and brought out a heavy box and a fist-sized stone that glowed faintly golden on a velvet cushion. He set them down on the table with a thud that echoed in the basement. Now answer my last question. His eyes were red and feral. How did you get these? Talent, Professor, Jason replied, slipping the earth vein crystal core back into its case as he turned for the door. And a bit of luck. Snape snorted, a cold, unreadable sound. He knew pressing would only make the other man shut down. He wouldn't learn the truth that way. Take your things and leave, quickly. Jason paused at the threshold, his back to the potion's master. It was a pleasure working with you, Professor. If you have other items of comparable quality, don't hesitate to find me. The door closed behind him. Snape stood alone, staring at the two blueprints on the table, the kind of knowledge that could overturn the entire world of potions, and remained motionless for a long time. In the headmaster's office, Fawkes the Phoenix chirped softly and rubbed its beak against Jason's finger. Dumbledore set his quill down. Even the portraits of past headmasters stopped their snoring and turned their attention in unison. Planes? Dumbledore asked carefully. That is a very, very dangerous word, Jason. Tell me, why are you interested? Curiosity, Jason said. I read about them in some very old books. Dumbledore rose and took a dusty wooden box from the top shelf of his bookcase. He set it on the desk and opened it. Inside lay a worn diary and a faded photograph. A young, brilliant man arm in arm with a young Dumbledore, both smiling broadly. That was Karis, Dumbledore said, voice threaded with distant sorrow. My closest friend when I was young. He was like you, brilliant, obsessed with the same questions. He became fixated on the idea of planes, convinced the deepest secrets of magic lay in other worlds. What happened? Jason asked. He succeeded. He believed he did. He spent his family's fortune, used the results of our joint research, and then he disappeared. Dumbledore opened the diary. The first pages were filled with clever theories and diagrams. But beyond a certain point, the handwriting broke down into frantic scrawls and spiral symbols. 3 days later, something came back. The body was his, but not the soul. It couldn't speak or recognize me. It drew those spirals everywhere it could, as if possessed, and repeated one word. What word? Jason asked. Door, Dumbledore whispered. It kept saying, the door is watching us. It drew doors until it had exhausted its magic and life, and then it withered away to a mummy before my eyes. The story chilled Jason deeper than any lecture could. Dumbledore closed the box and looked at him with worn pleading. No matter where you heard of this, no matter how good your reasons, promise me you will never, ever seek out that door. Jason was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. He believed Dumbledore, but the floating city's energy crisis was like a blade over their heads. He had responsibilities and no easy choices. Dumbledore watched him go until his figure receded, worry carved into his features. He sank back into his chair and stroked the wooden box as if drawing comfort from it. I hope it's not too late, he murmured. Main energy circuit overloaded by 17%. Hermione, your calculations are wrong. Fred's shout cut through the lab's constant hum. He pressed his gloved hands onto a blazing red rune panel. Heat tried to burn through his protection. Hermione, pale and exhausted after 24 hours without rest, waved her wand as fresh streams of data cascaded in front of her. All parameters are within theoretical limits. The resonance frequency of the Earth vein crystal core exceeded expectations. Don't argue about names, George snapped from across the room as he held another safety valve. The safety system is about to fail. 20 seconds and we're blown to bits. At the center of the lab, a 5-meter annular device thrummed like a huge steel heart come alive. Several earth vein crystal cores embedded in it had shifted from soft earthen yellow to a fierce golden red. Violent energy tore at the surrounding space, forming transparent ripples that the naked eye could see. The outer barrier is about to break, Ron yelled. He and Harry stood together beneath a trembling pale golden shield whose surface was riddled with radiating cracks and emitted a sound like the slow splintering of glass. Sirius stood behind them, wand at the ready. His expression was ashen, the weight of responsibility plain on him. He was the last line of defense, but what was happening exceeded anything he had faced before. Hold steady, Jason called, stepping up to the device and bracing himself against the raw power. He would lead the planar probe, project his mind out like a wire, pierce the spatial barrier, and anchor the energy-rich Earth elemental demigod plane so they could draw power safely. He drew a deep breath and began to marshal his inner magic. Just as his mental reach touched the device's core, the control crystal at the top, the size of a fist, flared up with a sinister crimson from within. An invisible but keenly hostile mental barrier exploded outward, a repulsive force that struck at his consciousness like an unyielding wall. Anchoring successful. Anchoring successful. Buzz, the ear-splitting hum, suddenly intensified, like a demon's fingernails on glass, tearing through the laboratory. At the center of the circular apparatus, the perfect crystal that served as the control core blinked, its gentle, earthy yellow glow flaring into violent crimson. System overload. Rune chains collapsing. Core rejecting connection. Hermione's scream cut through the roar. She gripped her wand so hard its tip condensed into tiny ice crystals, which shot erratically across the floor, leaving a small patch of frost. The waterfall of data streams suspended before her flashed red warnings. Every parameter jittered wildly, long beyond any theoretical safety margin. The crimson light coiled like a living, malicious tentacle. Whenever Jason's mental power reached for it, it snapped back, violently repelling him. A brutal will rose from the crystal, that roaring an unmistakable command. Get out! Runes on the lab walls began to sputter. Several magical lamps exploded, showering glass everywhere. The outer barriers about to turn into a frying pan, Fred shouted. He and George, one on each side of the console, pressed their hands down hard on two blistering rune panels, trying to stabilize the runaway energy. If we don't pull something off soon, we'll be going to heaven in a very different way, brother. George ground his teeth. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Ron and Harry stood shoulder to shoulder, their combined pale golden shield trembling. Spiderweb cracks spidered across its surface as energy leaked through. Merlin's beard. This thing's stronger than a troll, Ron groaned. His arm felt like it might snap. Jason, disconnect now. Sirius roared from behind them, face grim, wand already raised to forcibly abort the ritual if necessary. He couldn't just watch these children get blown apart. But Jason kept his eyes closed. His face was ashen, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. Each mental backlash felt like a hammer blow to his soul, but he couldn't pull away. The floating city was an aerial fortress with no fuel. Retreat meant certain doom. He shoved the pain down and squeezed the last of his magic into the link. He pushed the second-tier Grand Sun Codex past anything anyone had ever attempted. The golden sun true fire in his veins seemed to become molten magma. Through the mental link, it slammed into the crimson malice. 0. Jason forced the name out through clenched teeth, blood at his lips. Activate backup protocol, forced purification. A high hiss of released pressure filled the lab. 0, which had stood silent beside Jason, flared to life. Blue runes on its chest, incandescent, heat distorting the air. Fine red fractures raced across its metal casing. Steam hissed from its joints. It extended a mechanical arm. 5 metal fingers, crackling with electric arcs, ignored the heat and pressed straight onto the main control crystal. Instruction received. Initiating mental purification protocol. Overclocking activated. Zero's voice carried an unstable electrical edge for the first time, as if a limiter had been smashed. Sizzle. Overclocking online. The crimson light shrieked and lashed at the metal fingers like a living thing, but under Zero's suppression, it recoiled inch by inch, a mouse pushed back by a red-hot branding iron. Inside the crystal, the blurred crimson shifted and contorted into a twisted, screaming face. The white electric arcs ate at it, melting it away piece by piece. "What is this?" Hermione whispered, stunned beyond anything in her textbooks. Residual consciousness suppressed, connection channel opening. The resistance vanished. Jason's mind felt seized by an invisible hand and dragged forward, sucked into a bottomless abyss. The world dropped away. His spirit felt like a speck of dust suspended in endless gray void. All around, light flowed and twisted like liquid and gas, each strand tasting of bone-deep cold. He felt his mental power being eroded, as if plunged into strong acid. Mental projection stable. Analyzing spatial coordinates. Zero's data stream was a lifeline threaded through the emptiness. Spatial curvature, 327%. Dimensional stability, violently fluctuating. Warning, unknown mental interference in area. Jason sent his mental tendrils out despite the abrasive burn, probing deeper into the chaos. He felt distant, ancient, powerful, a summons like a traveler in a desert scenting an oasis. The Earth elemental demiplane, target locked, coordinates anchored. Spatial link stability, 68%. "I see it!" someone shouted inside his mind. The gray void tore open under an invisible force, revealing a huge rift. Beyond it was a world without sky, a boundless brown plain stretching to the horizon. Towering stone pillars, tens of thousands of meters tall, rose like the columns holding up the heavens, their surfaces etched with profound spirals and patterns that belonged to no known civilization. Countless earthy yellow motes drifted and collided in the air, no dust, but pure, crystalline earth elemental fragments. A single breath made Jason's spirit sting with a saturated, bloated ache, like drowning in strong liquor. In the lab, a vast curtain of light blossomed above the apparatus, projecting in real time the scene Jason's spirit was seeing. Fred and George fell silent, eyes wide at the spectacle. "Is this a demiplane?" Hermione murmured, feeling every book she'd studied shrink into insignificance. Warning: planar barrier self-repairing. Connection expected to close in 3 minutes. Zero's reminder snapped Jason back. "Can't let it close." He threaded more tendrils into the rift, greedily tasting the pulse of that world. The earth elemental energy here was like concentrated liquor. What they could draw from their own world was watered-down drivel by comparison. If they could anchor a stable extraction channel here, elemental energy would be essentially limitless. Detecting high-value target. Super-large geomantic crystal core vein discovered 800 meters from anchor point. Zero's report scrolled across the light curtain for everyone to see. The scene on the light screen deepened, and the lab's noisy alarms seemed to recede. It showed a world without sun or stars, yet everything glowed softly. An endless brown plain stretched to the horizon, its surface covered in a fine, glittering dust, as if the entire land had been paved with crushed gems. Even more awe-inspiring were the colossal stone pillars rising from the ground, 1,000-meter monoliths at the very least, each carved with dizzying spiral patterns, like a celestial book etched into the world by some ancient civilization. "Merlin's beard." Ron stared at the screen, slack-jawed. "This place is grander than any wizard card I've ever seen." "Not grander. Regulated," Hermione corrected without meaning to. "A self-contained subspace, composed entirely of earth elements. Every particle here obeys physical laws different from our own." Fred and George had already forgotten the danger they'd just been in. They craned their necks as if at a spectacle. "Look at those floating specks of light," Fred said, pointing at the slow, earth-yellow motes drifting in the air, a merchant's gleam in his eyes. "If we could scoop some up and bring it back, just the name Dust of Another World would sell out our joke shop in Hogsmeade." George rolled his eyes, one hand still pressed to the scorching rune panel. "Don't be daft. Keeping this link open is already frying us." Only Sirius didn't lose himself in wonder. He tightened his grip on his wand. Having been an Auror through the war, he felt a buried, terrible power under that tranquil scene, something that could crush everything if stirred. Then, without warning, the drifting specks of light froze midair. The low-frequency hum coming from the distant giant pillars died. Even the elemental particles in the atmosphere seemed to stop as if held by an invisible hand. Absolute stillness filled the space, a deep, soul-swallowing quiet. Slowly, from deep within the ground, an immeasurable consciousness awakened. Ancient as the dawn of time, heavy as a planet, serene as a glacier that had not melted for 10,000 years, yet it had been disturbed. Alert, detecting superstandard psychic field coverage, level unknown, unable to parse. Zero's voice came through with static for the first time, tinged with mechanical panic. "Recommend. Immediately terminate link." Too late. An invisible weight descended into the laboratory, an overwhelming pressure like the authority of the cosmos itself. Ron's legs gave out. He fell to his knees, bones creaking, lungs burning yet unable to draw a breath. Fred and George were slammed against the control panel. Their protective suits' warning lights flashed wild, and thermometer needles shot into the red. "Defensive barrier," Hermione screamed, raising her wand. A pale golden light flared at the tip, but it lasted only an instant before dissipating like glass crushed by an impossible force. "Everyone behind me," Sirius roared. Pouring everything he knew into a single, desperate spell, he threw up a Patronus shield, silver and mercury-like, that rose to protect the children. It held for half a second before spiderweb cracks raced across it with a grinding sound of distortion, and it shattered. Sirius spat blood, dropping to one knee, his wand creaking in his hand. On the mental plane, Jason bore a pressure orders of magnitude greater than the others. He felt like a grain of iron sand dropped into a forge, examined and crushed from every dimension by invisible eyes. It wasn't hatred that pressed on him, only curiosity, vast and indifferent, like a giant woken after eons by the edge of a sliver of light. The giant fixed its gaze on that tiny speck. A torrent of nonverbal thought slammed into Jason's mind. It was not language, it was the birth of nebulae, the drift of tectonic plates, the memories formed by rock over billions of years of solitude. It was the cold, primeval narrative of time, existence, and entropy, and then, distilled into a single impassive will, intruder, prove your worth. With that, the Earth element demiplane seemed to challenge its uninvited visitor. In the lab, the planar anchoring device shrieked. Sparks danced across its casing as the core energy circuit blackened and burned. Main circuit overload, 1,200%, the readout screamed. Hermione looked at the cascading red data and screamed, "The psychic link is being inverted. It's attacking Jason." "Not attacking," Jason managed to say through clenched teeth. His face was paper white, cold sweat running down his cheeks, blood at the corners of his mouth. "It's a qualification assessment." The ancient will spoke again, this time with a hint of curiosity rather than contempt. Jason had to prove himself not to be something that could be crushed without thought. He abandoned elaborate spells and structures and reached for the most fundamental, core power within him. He pushed the second-tier Grand Sun Codex to an unprecedented limit. From the depths of his spirit core, a thin, pure, domineering golden flame flared, as if condensed from a sun's heart. Sun true fire. Against that world-weighted will, the flame was no larger than a candle's flicker. But it did not gutter. With the stubbornness of something that would burn away ages and assert supremacy, it wrapped the core of Jason's consciousness, searing away the probing tendrils of thought trying to plumb his deepest secrets. For the first time, the crushing pressure hesitated. Interesting flame, the ancient will conveyed, true recognition in its tone. Small, yet pure. Jason felt the space around him loosen. The oppressive weight began to lift. "Tell me, little one," the will asked, genuinely curious now, "what crisis has brought you here?" 140. Team concerns. Jason did not dare be careless. He summarized the idea of the floating city, its enormous energy needs, the stealth array's drain, and the current depletion of elemental reserves in the magical world, compressing it all into the briefest, most direct thoughts. He carefully omitted any mention of Lord Voldemort and Zero, stressing only that they were trying to build a sanctuary for their companions in a world full of threats. "A floating city sanctuary," the ancient voice said, carrying a distant, weary sigh. "I remember, long ago there were such things. Those builders and their cities were swept away by the long river of time." For a moment, the entire demiplane fell silent again. "My domain is too quiet. Your world is too noisy. I need a pair of eyes to watch for change. In return, I will grant you stability." In the laboratory, Zero's shrill alarm finally cut out. Alert cleared. High concentration, high stability energy aggregate detected. Moving toward our side through the connection channel. On the light screen, at the center of the spatial rift, a fist-sized, earthy yellow crystal floated out, glowing warmly. Inside it lay what looked like a miniature galaxy, countless yellow points of light revolving and colliding, marking the birth and death of tiny worlds. "This is a wisp of my consciousness," the ancient voice said, now clear in everyone's minds. "It will help you with your energy problem. Accept it, child of humanity. In exchange, you will become my coordinate in your world." The crystal drifted to Jason and hovered there. He stared at it, torn between exhilaration and dread. The friendship of an ancient entity could be the floating city's greatest boon or its greatest danger. But he had no other option. "I accept," he said. He reached out and pressed his fingertip to the crystal. The moment they touched, the gem seemed to liquefy like mercury and slid silently beneath the skin of his palm. Jason pulled his hand back. The flesh was unmarked, as if nothing had happened. But deep inside him, an ancient word detonated, and with it came the clear image Dumbledore had warned him about. The face of that genius friend, wild with spiral symbols. The word echoed in his mind. Door. Jason clenched his fist and looked at his palm. Under the skin, a complex spiral mark, carved like old stone, was slowly forming, faintly glowing with an ancient light. The soul-crushing pressure that had threatened them receded like a tide. The lab was dead quiet. The air smelled of ozone and burnt metal, overlaid with the damp, sweet earthiness of soil after heavy rain, a scent that seemed to seep through cracks in the floor and grow stronger by the moment. Ugh! Ron was the first to give out. He dropped to his knees and vomited, as if he'd been breathing damp, cold earth instead of air. Each breath felt heavy and choking. George sagged against a scorched control panel, attempting a grin at his brother in vain. His face wouldn't cooperate. He managed only a weak, "I think my eyebrows have been singed." Fred had no energy to answer. His hand reached instinctively for his wand and found nothing. It had slipped from him in the earlier shock and lay a short distance away, still crackling with faint electrical arcs. Only Sirius forced himself up. His chest ached from the backlash. Blood flecked his lips, but he forced it down and stepped forward to put himself between danger and Harry. His gaze swept the ruined lab like a hawk's before locking onto Jason. "Jason, what on earth was that?" he demanded. All eyes turned to Jason. Fear, confusion, and a thrill they barely noticed. Jason looked down at his right hand, where the spiraling mark pulsed faintly under his skin, a living thing in its own right. The light was warm and deep, distinct from the surging sun-true fire within him, and yet it did not try to consume that fire. He clenched his fist to hide the mark and met everyone's faces. He sounded exhausted. "That wasn't a thing," he said. "It was a will, the will of a world." Hermione steadied herself on a table and asked, white-faced, "A will of a world? You mean that word Professor Dumbledore warned us about?" "Plain." Jason spit the word out like a stone. The lab held its breath. Only a few burnt rune circuits popped occasionally. "Alive?" Fred gaped. "So we nearly got stared to death by a living planet? Is that why it let us go? Because it thinks Jason's handsome?" George, as ever, searched for the lightest angle. "It sensed the floating city's energy crisis," Jason explained, sliding his back along an intact pillar to steady himself. "In exchange for giving us stable energy, I became its eyes, its coordinate in our world." Sirius's face hardened into something like terror. He stepped forward, voice tight with caution. "A deal? You made a bargain with something you don't understand? Jason, that's reckless." "We had no choice," Jason said. "There's always another choice." Sirius snapped, wand half raised, its tip pointing at the floor as his temper and fear warred. "I survived a war, Jason. I've seen exactly how this plays out. Unknown power like this. People think they can control it, and then it corrupts them. Look at those who followed Voldemort. They were all convinced at first that they could handle what they'd taken. I am not them," Jason said quietly. "How can you be sure?" Sirius's gaze flicked to Harry. His protectiveness almost overrode reason. "If you insist on this path, I won't stand by. I'll stop you, for everyone's sake, and for Harry's." Jason interrupted, his voice firm as a vow. "Then let it be me who pays the price." He met Sirius's furious eyes. "If there's any backlash, it will come for me first. I promise you that."